Have you ever noticed how often people skip over the messy parts of a story? Especially when that story is being used to justify power or control? Whether it's a feel-good celebration that hides a history of violence or a parable that leaves out the pain leading up to that moment of forgiveness, half the story often gets left behind. But if we only tell the clean version, we miss the chance to really understand each other. And we miss the chance to actually heal. Welcome to Mythologizing the Bible, where we'll be taking a look at 3 readings from the Christian Bible through the lens of sacred myth. As we reflect on the readings for the 4th Sunday in Lent, we're going to look beyond the traditional Christian narrative to uncover a few lessons that should resonate with all of us, regardless of our religious background or lack thereof. In this episode, we're digging into what it really takes to forgive and reconcile. We'll explore why it's not enough to just move on or say, it's okay. And we'll look at how true reconciliation starts with hearing the full story, especially the parts that are uncomfortable. Because when we take the time to understand each other fully, we open the door to fresh starts that actually mean something. So let's dig into that. Let's question what we've been told. Let's re-examine these stories and find a way forward that actually makes sense. Because if we want reconciliation to be real, we've got to be willing to hear the whole story. So grab a comfy seat, a glass of your favorite beverage, and let's look at some ancient stories together in this edition of Mythologizing the Bible, where we'll be exploring the readings for the 4th Sunday in Lent, Cycle C of the Roman Catholic Lectionary. In this series, we're exploring readings from the Bible through the lens of sacred myth, looking for interpretations and lessons that don't demand a belief in the supernatural. What that means from a practical standpoint is that we will assume that these stories and writings are fiction, written by pre-scientific people who were just trying to make sense of the universe. Now, you might agree with the lessons I find, but I encourage you to look for something that rings true to you. Part of the beauty of understanding these writings as sacred myths is that we're free to interpret them for ourselves. We're free to learn the lessons that we need right now. So with that, let's dive in. As I said, tonight we'll be looking at the readings for the 4th Sunday in Lent, Cycle C. Our first reading is from the book of Joshua. It's chapter 5, verses 9a and verses 10 through 12. Our second reading is from Paul's second letter to the Corinthians. It's chapter 5, verses 17 through 21. And our gospel reading is from Luke. It's chapter 15, verses 1 through 3, and verses 11 through 32. Now, we'll start by going through all 3 of the readings, then we'll look for the messages and the main lesson in each one. Finally, we'll bring everything together, look at what it means for us today, and talk about where we go from here. And with that, let's begin. Our first reading is from Joshua. Then the Lord said to Joshua, "Today I have rolled away the reproach of Egypt from you." On the evening of the 14th day of the month, while camped at Gilgal, on the plains of Jericho, the Israelites celebrated the Passover. The day after the Passover, that very day, they ate some of the produce of the land, unleavened bread and roasted grain. The manna stopped the day after they ate this food from the land. There was no longer any manna for the Israelites, but that year they ate the produce of Canaan. Our second reading is from Paul's second letter to the Corinthians. Brothers and sisters, therefore, if anyone is in Christ, the new creation has come. The old has gone, the new is here. All this is from God, who reconciled us to himself through Christ and gave us the ministry of reconciliation. That God was reconciling the world to himself in Christ, not counting people's sins against them. And he has committed to us the message of reconciliation. We are therefore Christ's ambassadors, as though God were making his appeal through us. We implore you on Christ's behalf, be reconciled to God. God made him who had no sin to be sin for us, so that in him we might become the righteousness of God. And our gospel reading is from Luke. Now the tax collectors and sinners were all gathering around to hear Jesus. But the Pharisees and the teachers of the law muttered, "This man welcomes sinners and eats with them." Then Jesus told them this parable. There was a man who had 2 sons. The younger one said to his father, "Father, give me my share of the estate." So he divided his property between them. Not long after that, the younger son got together all he had, set off for a distant country, and there squandered his wealth in wild living. After he had spent everything, there was a severe famine in that whole country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to a citizen of that country, who sent him to his fields to feed pigs. He longed to fill his stomach with the pods that the pigs were eating, but no one gave him anything. When he came to his senses, he said, "How many of my father's hired servants have food to spare, and here I am starving to death? I will set out and go back to my father and say to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants.' So he got up and went to his father. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion for him. He ran to his son, threw his arms around him, and kissed him. The son said to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son.' But the father said to his servants, 'Quick, bring the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. Bring the fattened calf and kill it. Let's have a feast and celebrate. For this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found.' So they began to celebrate. Meanwhile, the older son was in the field. When he came near the house, he heard music and dancing. So he called one of the servants and asked him what was going on. 'Your brother has come,' he replied, 'and your father has killed the fattened calf because he has him back safe and sound.' The older brother became angry and refused to go in. So his father went out and pleaded with him. But he answered his father, 'Look, all these years I've been slaving for you and never disobeyed your orders. Yet you never gave me even a young goat so I could celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours, who has squandered your property with prostitutes, comes home, you kill the fattened calf for him.' 'My son,' the father said, 'you are always with me, and everything I have is yours. But we had to celebrate and be glad, because this brother of yours was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found.'" All right, so let's go back and take a bit of a critical look at these readings and see what learnings and lessons we can find if we dig around just a little bit. So our first reading was from the book of Joshua. And, on the surface, well, this passage reads like a celebratory moment that the Israelites are finally entering the promised land. They're sharing the Passover together, and they're transitioning from manna to food harvested from the land. If you isolate these verses, which is exactly what the lectionary does, it's easy to imagine a group of grateful, faithful people joyfully marking the start of something new. But when we zoom out, we get a much more complicated and frankly, a much more troubling picture. I won't go into great detail. You can read the verses before and after this selection yourself. But basically, this moment of celebration it's sandwiched between a mass circumcision, where Joshua forced all of the Israelite men to be circumcised, and they were laying around in camp recovering. So it was sandwiched between that and a brutal military conquest. We've all heard the story of, Joshua fought the battle of Jericho and the walls came tumbling down. What we didn't sing about in church was the fact that Joshua went in at God's command, and the Israelites and Joshua, they killed every living being in Jericho. Men, women, and children, and animals, everything living was put to the sword. So this celebration was between a mass forced circumcision and a brutal, almost genocidal conquest of Jericho. It's not just about beginning a new chapter. This is a story of domination, displacement, and destruction. The reality is, stories, especially ancient stories, can be edited, cropped, or selectively quoted to make them sound inspiring or sacred. But if we want to understand what's really going on, we have to look at the full narrative, not just the lectionary's highlight reel. This isn't just about ancient Israel, though. It's something we see in our world all the time. Politicians, religious leaders, media outlets, they all cherry-pick information to make themselves or their causes look good. But real wisdom, real justice, demands that we look deeper. We need context. We need to know more about the history, and we need a willingness to ask hard questions even when the truth is uncomfortable. That's why this reading matters, not because it gives us a model for divine celebration, but because it reminds us how easily a story can be manipulated. When we only hear part of the story, we risk misunderstanding the situation entirely. We might admire something that shouldn't be admired. We might support something that, if we knew the whole truth, we would clearly reject. We have to be critical thinkers. Whether we're reading scripture, watching the news, or just reflecting on our own lives, we need to be brave enough to ask, what's missing? So the main lesson I got from our first reading is that to correctly judge something, we need the whole story. If we're going to be fair, thoughtful, and ethical people, we can't take stories at face value, especially not ones that paint over violence with a fresh coat of celebration. We have to look for the bigger picture. We have to ask tough questions, and we need to be willing to dig beneath the surface. That's how we grow in compassion and wisdom. Because to correctly judge something, we need the whole story. Our second reading was from Paul's second letter to the Corinthians. And when we read this passage without all the supernatural framing, it's actually a strong statement about human relationships, especially during times of conflict and division. Paul was trying to bring people back together, to repair a fractured community. He talks about reconciliation, and not just between individuals and God, but among people who have disagreed, people who have mistrusted each other or even drifted apart. That's something we can all relate to, whether it's in our families, friendships, workplaces, in our communities. When there's tension or betrayal, healing doesn't just come from saying, "Oh, I forgive you." It takes reconciliation, an intentional choice to repair the relationships and begin again. And reconciliation takes both people. Both people need to be willing to grow and change. What makes this even more powerful is that Paul doesn't just say, "Oh, forgive and forget." he frames it as a transformation, a chance to become a new creation, as he puts it, a chance to start fresh and to build something stronger than you had before. If we let go of the supernatural bits about sin being removed through Christ, and if we instead focus on the human elements of change and renewal, well, this becomes a very relatable and useful idea. Reconciliation isn't about pretending the past didn't happen. It's about facing it, learning from it, and then choosing to move forward with new understanding and with a shared purpose. And that's something we desperately need more of today. So many relationships break down because people either don't want to acknowledge harm or they don't believe reconciliation is even possible. But it is. When we commit to empathy, when we make space for honest conversations, when we choose to let go of resentment and meet each other in the present moment, we make room for something better. And that kind of reconciliation has ripple effects. It can heal not just individuals, but entire communities. So the main lesson I got from our second reading is that true forgiveness and reconciliation gives us a fresh start together. At its heart, this passage reminds us that real change happens when we forgive, not passively, but with intention, and when we reconcile in a way that gives both parties a fresh start together. That's how we build stronger relationships. That's how we build better communities. That's how we create a more compassionate world. Because true forgiveness and reconciliation gives us a fresh start together. Okay, our final reading was from the Gospel of Luke. And this is the famous parable of the prodigal son. And it's one of those biblical narratives that still resonates deeply, even when we strip away the religious framing. At its core, it's about fractured relationships and the difficult road back to connection. Sure, the son's request would have been shocking in that culture. Right? Demanding his inheritance early was essentially wishing his father dead. And let's face it, the younger son normally didn't get anything anyway. But what really matters here isn't the technicalities of inheritance law of the time. It's the very human moment when the son realizes he's hit rock bottom. And he decides, you know what, I need to return home. I need to go back to my father. He doesn't know if he'll be welcomed back. He just knows that he can't keep going the way he has. But maybe what's most striking is not the son's apology. It's the father's response. Think about it. He sees his son from far off and runs to him, which I think tells us something important. The father had been watching. He'd been waiting and hoping that his son would return. So that moment isn't just about forgiveness, it's about readiness. The father didn't wait to hear the son's full apology before embracing him. He didn't demand proof of repentance. He simply chose to forgive. And that's a radical idea, even today. We're so used to forgiveness being conditional. It's conditional upon apologies or on restitution or on at least acknowledgement of wrongdoing. But what if real reconciliation begins not with the one who left, but with the one who stayed open? And then there's the older brother who feels overlooked and underappreciated. And honestly, many of us have been in his shoes. That part of the story reminds us that forgiveness doesn't always feel fair to the other people around us. But if we only extend forgiveness when it feels fair, I think we miss the bigger picture. Forgiveness isn't about erasing the past. It's about choosing to stop letting the past control the present. It's about making peace possible, even when the wounds still ache. And in a world where blame is loud and reconciliation is rare, choosing forgiveness is how we can move forward. So the main lesson I got from our gospel reading is that the key to reconciliation and moving forward is forgiveness. Whether we're the one who left, the one who stayed, or the one who feels left behind, we all have a role to play in healing relationships. And forgiveness, real, sometimes unfair, often messy forgiveness, is what makes that healing possible. Because the key to reconciliation and moving forward is forgiveness. All right, let's review the lessons we've talked about so far. In our first reading from Joshua, the main lesson I came away with was to correctly judge something, we need the whole story. In our second reading from 2 Corinthians, the main lesson I got was true forgiveness and reconciliation give us a fresh start together. And finally, the main lesson I got from our gospel reading was the key to reconciliation and moving forward is forgiveness. If we're going to build genuine reconciliation, we have to be willing to hear the full story, our own and everyone else's. That means sitting with uncomfortable truths. It means naming past harm and listening without jumping straight to judgment. It's not about picking sides. It's about understanding all sides. Only when we've seen the bigger picture can we offer forgiveness that actually means something. Not just for the sake of moving on, but for the sake of truly healing. And when that forgiveness is real, it opens the door to fresh starts. Real forgiveness helps us build stronger relationships. It helps us create a future that isn't stuck in the past. If we want reconciliation to be real, we have to start by seeking the whole story. So let's step back and take another look at these readings overall and see if we can figure out what these lessons really mean to us in our daily lives. To do this, I'll try to answer two questions. So what and now what? Okay, so what? Why should we care about any of this? Well, we should care about this because it's important to get the whole story before we talk about forgiveness or reconciliation. Because if we don't, we're not really healing. We're just pretending. And pretending doesn't fix a damn thing. It's easy to stay stuck in our own version of events, especially when those versions make us feel like the hero. But here's the truth. Reconciliation doesn't happen when everyone's just shouting their own side louder. It happens when we stop, listen, and then make room for the uncomfortable parts of someone else's truth. This is important because we have to recognize that most people are just repeating the narratives they've been handed. Whether it's news sources, religious communities, or cultural bubbles, people internalize stories that help them make sense of the world. That doesn't mean those stories are true or even complete. But if we want to understand someone, we have to go deeper than just their slogans and sound bites. We should care about this because we can't get the full picture unless we're actually willing to talk to people. And that means stepping outside our comfort zones and asking real questions without assuming we already know the answers. Instead of dismissing someone's perspective as ridiculous or dangerous right off the bat, what if we got a little curious about what's underneath it? And what's the fear? What's the struggle? What's the loss? This is important because we have to look beyond what people say. We have to try to understand what they live. People's behavior often comes from pain or from unmet needs or even generational patterns. If we only focus on what someone says in the moment, we miss the decades of backstory that shaped that moment. Now, that doesn't mean excusing harmful behavior, but it does mean understanding it so we can respond with a little more wisdom. We should care about this because forgiveness only works when it's rooted in honesty, not in denial. We're not talking about letting things slide or pretending everything's fine, though. We're talking about doing the hard work of facing the truth together. That's the kind of forgiveness that leads to real change, that leads to real peace, and to a future that isn't just a repeat of the past. So yeah, if we're serious about healing what's broken in our relationships or in our communities, then we have to care about the whole story. That's the only way forward. The last question I try to answer is, now what? What are we supposed to do? Where do we go from here? Well, one of the biggest challenges we face when we're trying to build bridges, especially with people we deeply disagree with, is that we usually don't have the full story. Not theirs, not even always our own. We spend a lot of time defending our beliefs, but not enough time exploring where those beliefs came from, or asking what shaped someone else's beliefs. If we want to move toward reconciliation, toward real reconciliation, we have to get curious. We have to listen more. And we have to admit that we might not know everything about why people act or think the way they do. So with that in mind, here's your question for the week. Whose story do you need to understand better, and what's one step you can take to learn more about it? This question matters because empathy doesn't just happen. It grows when we do the work of listening and seeking understanding. And that doesn't always mean having a deep heart-to-heart with someone who makes your blood boil. Sometimes it starts with a simple shift in your mindset, like noticing what someone's struggling with instead of what they're doing wrong. Or even asking, what could I be missing here? Before jumping to judgment. Almost 30 years ago, I was a supervisor at a General Motors factory, and I supervised an engine cradle assembly cell. We basically welded together all of the pieces that make up the big metal frame that cradled the engine in a few very popular GM car models at the time. It was difficult, heavy, hot, nasty work. And we didn't have good welders at every, if we didn't have good welders at every station, everything just slowed down and it impacted the entire cell. So one of the welders was this long-haired, scrawny drug addict who was missing most of his teeth. The supervisors that had come before me they'd stopped penalizing him, right? They'd stopped disciplining him because it didn't work, and I think they just sort of felt sorry for him. Now, he was never high or strung out when he showed up to work, and he was a pretty good welder. So the prior foreman had just sort of worked around him, finding someone to cover his job when he didn't show up, which was quite often. Now, I wasn't really one to shy away from penalizing someone who deserved to be disciplined. But I wasn't really sure if that's what this guy deserved, or if it was what he needed. So I talked to the job setter, the guy who was sort of the team lead and knew every job, and I talked to a couple other folks who had been around for a long time. And I learned that this guy had been an amazing welder. He was just fast and clean, but he had some personal problems, and he started using harder and harder drugs to deal with those personal problems. So instead of cracking down on him or ignoring him and working around his absences, like the other foreman had done, I started talking to him. I started encouraging him. And I started asking him how he was doing. Not to pry, but just asking, how are you doing? And eventually, he admitted to me that he wasn't doing so well. And I asked if I could help him get some help from some folks who knew how to deal with this sort of stuff. Now, he was a bit uncertain, but he eventually agreed when I assured him that I would protect his job while he did whatever he needed to do to get clean. So I worked with the union and the EAP, the Employee Assistance Program, and they were able to get him into a detox program. Now, he was off work for over a month. It might have been closer to 6 weeks, but I held his job. I didn't try to backfill it, and I didn't let anyone else claim it. And when he came back, it was amazing. Now, don't get me wrong. He was still, greasy and scrawny and toothless, but he was always on the job at the start of the shift. He worked as long as I needed him to, and I don't think we ever had to repair any of his wells. And that all happened because I realized that I didn't have the whole story. And even though I never did learn everything that had happened to him in his life, I learned enough. That he had been an excellent welder, that he had been a good employee, but that personal problems and probably some really poor choices on his part had taken their toll. Now, answering this question can help you stop reacting on autopilot and start approaching relationships, especially tense relationships, with a bit more clarity and more care. Whose story do you need to understand better, and what's one step you can take to learn more about it? Because over time, that mindset shift can change how you interact with everyone around you. One thoughtful question, one open conversation, one pause before you respond, it all adds up. So give it some real thought. Whose story don't you fully know yet? And how can you start listening for it? Well, before I wrap things up, I'd like to leave you with one more thought. Carl Rogers, a psychologist and the founder of humanistic psychology, once said, "We think we listen, but very rarely do we listen with real understanding, true empathy. Yet listening of this very special kind is one of the most potent forces for change that I know." Rogers spent his life studying human behavior and relationships, and he knew something a lot of us forget. Real listening, the kind that's patient, curious, and non-defensive. Real listening can change everything. It's not about agreeing with someone or letting go of your own values. It's about being willing to hear their story so you can respond from a place of wisdom instead of a place of reaction. That's exactly what our question this week is about. If we want reconciliation, if we want to heal divisions, whether in our families, our communities, or even in the country, we have to start by understanding people better. Not their slogans, not their social media posts or the meme-like talking points. We need to understand their stories. And the first step toward that is listening with real empathy. Like Carl Rogers said, it's one of the most powerful tools for change that we've got. All right, we've come to the end of this episode. Thanks for joining me. I'll be back again next week. But in the meantime, I encourage you to engage with our question for the week and pay attention to the important lessons you come across, wherever you find them. You'll create a more purposeful and joyful life, and you'll start to feel more connected to the world and the people around you. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Mythologizing the Bible as we did a deeper dive into the readings for the fourth Sunday in Lent, Cycle C of the Roman Catholic Lectionary. remember that if we want reconciliation to be real, we have to start by seeking the whole story. The Bible readings used for this episode are from the Holy Bible, New International Version, NIV, copyright 1973, 1978, 1984, and 2011 by Biblica Inc., used by permission, all rights reserved worldwide. Thank you again for listening. If you like this content, please consider telling a friend about it. The more people who hear the positive messages I'm sharing, the better. Mythologizing the Bible is a live-streamed series held most Thursdays at 9 p.m. Eastern Time on twitch.tv/thecodaproject. Every week, the audio of these Mythologizing the Bible presentations is released as a podcast. You can find both the podcast and the video versions of the presentations at thecodaproject.com. CODA stands for Creating Our Divine Alignment. When we learn to align our words and actions with our core values, that alignment feels absolutely exquisite. It feels divine. But it's a divine alignment that doesn't require belief in the supernatural. It's a divine alignment we have the ability to create for ourselves. To learn more, to subscribe to my mailing list, and to keep up on everything I'm doing with the Coda Project, please visit thecodaproject.com.